The carriage wheels groaned over the dirt road, their rhythm like a funeral drum that refused to stop. The driver, a grizzled man who knew every bend between Charleston and Columbia, muttered a prayer under his breath as the sun bled into the horizon. He had driven merchants, planters, surveyors, men with fine waistcoats and ambitious plans, and too many of them had vanished after this stretch of road. Tonight his only passenger was silent, hat brim low, eyes fixed on the gathering dark. Samuel Hartwell had the look of a man who noticed more than he allowed himself to admit. The ledgers in his satchel rattled with every jolt of the carriage, numbers and signatures waiting to be turned into truths. On the page, death had been neat, policies, payouts, signatures. On the road, it smelled of sweat, swamp rot and something more, something sweet, like a flower blooming out of season. 6 miles up ahead, the driver said finally, pointing his whip toward a glow in the trees. The light was steady, not the flicker of a campfire but the warm invitation of lantern glass. A white-columned silhouette broke the line of oaks, elegant against the dusk, as though it had been placed there to comfort the weary. To any other traveler, it would have looked like salvation. To Hartwell, it looked like a trap wearing a ribbon. The inn was alive with sound, laughter, clinking glass, the low hum of a piano trying to soften the rough edges of men far from home. As Hartwell stepped down, his boots sank into the damp earth. The air carried the perfume of roses, impossibly strong for this late in the season, as if the garden had been coaxed into bloom by some unseen hand. Then she appeared. Lavinia Fisher glided across the porch as though she were descending a stage. Tall, copper hair catching the lantern glow, eyes that held too much knowledge for a stranger. She did not ask Hartwell his name, she spoke it, as though she had rehearsed. Mr. Henderson, is it? Charleston has been expecting you. Her voice was honey poured into glass, clear and golden, but beneath it ran a current that pulled the listener wherever she pleased. Hartwell offered the briefest bow. You are well informed. We take care of our guests, she replied, her smile widening. Here, no man is a stranger. The door opened under her hand, and the warmth of the inn embraced him. A fire whispered in the hearth. Candles softened the edges of shadow. Men in traveling coats leaned back in chairs, their laughter too loud, too eager, as if they had found rare peace. A cup was placed in each hand before questions were asked. A melody drifted from the piano, played by John Fisher, her husband. His fingers struck the keys with the precision of a craftsman, his gaze darting now and then toward his wife, as if measuring her approval. Hartwell stood still, absorbing the stage. Every detail mattered, the china cups, identical, the rugs, too new for a house this old, the faint scatter of petals near the stair, pink against the dark wood. To another guest, it would seem like charm. To him, it was evidence hiding in plain sight. Lavinia returned with a tray, her movements fluid, rehearsed. The road takes its toll, she said. A sip of my restorative always brings a man back to himself. The steam carried that same scent he had found in every report, almond, delicate and dangerous. Hartwell reached for the cup. The moment his hand brushed porcelain, she tilted her head, studying him with a kind of intimacy that stripped away disguise. For a breath, it seemed as though she could see through the false name, through the story of Richmond business, into the man beneath. You must be weary, she whispered, almost tender. Here, let me ease it. The room waited, the fire crackling, John's music softening. Around him, other travelers lifted their cups, their eyes glazed not with drunkenness but something quieter, heavier, as though rest itself were slipping into their veins. Hartwell smiled politely, though his pulse was thunder in his throat. He had come to Charleston for ledgers and patterns, for numbers that whispered of fraud. But standing in that room, under her gaze, he realized this was no matter of ink and policies. This was theater. And he had just stepped onto the stage of a woman who knew how every act should end. The first thing Hartwell noticed after settling into the parlor was how easily men surrendered to her. Lavinia Fisher moved from guest to guest as if she were not merely hostess but confessor, leaning close, nodding at the right moments, touching a sleeve just enough to make a merchant believe his burdens were worth her keeping. Each laugh she coaxed carried a weight, a kind of loosening of armor. By the time she returned to the tray, her guests looked like candles softened by heat, melting slowly, unaware. Hartwell pretended to join their ease. He accepted the seat offered, set his untouched cup before him, and let his eyes drift. On the mantel lay a row of books bound in leather, their titles religious and respectable: sermons, moral reflections, a hymnal open to the rest eternal. It was a careful staging, a performance of virtue. But dust had been disturbed unevenly. Some spines gleamed as though handled often, others dulled as if untouched in years. He recognized the pattern: books for display, books for show, the kind of collection meant to impress the innocent and distract the discerning. From the piano, John Fisher watched him. His music never faltered, yet his gaze lingered too long, like a guard's glance cloaked in melody. Hartwell met it briefly and looked away, filing the detail for later. Husband and wife were not partners in affection but in enterprise, one setting the rhythm while the other dictated the dance. A planter in the corner slurred his thanks for Lavinia's tea, his speech slowed, his smile slack. "Never slept better," he murmured, head drooping to one side as though the fire's warmth alone had undone him. Another guest reached for his second cup, voice unsteady with the kind of trust that cannot be earned in a single evening, yet had been granted nonetheless. Hartwell marked them both. If the rumors were true, they might not rise at dawn. "Mr. Henderson," Lavinia's voice lilted again, calling his alias across the room, "you've hardly touched your cup." She lifted it delicately, offering it back to him with a smile. The porcelain felt heavier in his hand this time, as though her gaze alone had filled it with expectation. Around them, the parlor grew quieter, the guests lulled into a haze that was part comfort, part surrender. He raised the cup near his lips, letting the steam blur his vision. The almond sweetness curled into his nose, a whisper of every report he had read. He tilted the cup, enough to wet the rim, and let it touch his mouth without swallowing. The performance was convincing, her eyes softened, pleased, but the taste that clung to his tongue was acrid beneath the floral mask. A bitterness not meant for healing. Moments later, footsteps echoed from the porch. Another traveler entered, dust and exhaustion clinging to him. A young surveyor by his instruments, eager to boast of new contracts in Columbia. Lavinia welcomed him with the same effortless warmth, a sweep of her hand that promised he had chosen wisely to rest here. The man's relief was palpable. He dropped his satchel, loosened his collar, and followed her with the obedience of someone who had already decided to trust. Hartwell watched, unease building like a storm cloud. The young man's enthusiasm, his naive chatter about land and fortune, reminded him of his younger self, before ledgers, before suspicion became a profession. For an instant, Hartwell's disguise felt heavier. He was no longer just an investigator. He was witness to a play that would end in silence, unless he turned the script. The surveyor's cup was poured. His hand trembled, not from fear but from hunger and fatigue. He raised it high in a toast no one had asked for. To Charleston's generosity, he declared, grinning. The other men chuckled weakly. Lavinia inclined her head, radiant in the candlelight. Hartwell set his own cup down with care. His pulse hammered. If he broke character now, if he warned the young man, or knocked the cup aside, he would reveal himself too soon. Evidence was not yet in his hand. Suspicion was not proof. And proof was the only language Charleston courts would hear. The boy drank. The parlor exhaled as if a chord had resolved. Lavinia's smile never faltered, but her eyes flicked once toward John at the piano, a glance sharp as a blade. The music deepened, a darker strain threading through the melody. Hartwell leaned back, every nerve alive. He could not save this one, not yet. But he could bear witness. And he could make certain that when the final act came, the curtain would fall on her, not him. The storm broke after midnight. Rain hammered the roof of the Wayfarer house like fists on a coffin lid. Wind threaded through the shutters, dragging branches across the glass in long, shrieking strokes. Most of the travelers had surrendered to sleep, some slumped in chairs by the fire, others stumbling upstairs after cups too generously filled. The young surveyor, who had toasted Charleston's generosity, now lay motionless in his bed, his face turned toward the wall as though listening for dreams that would never come. Hartwell stood by his own window, the latch drawn tight. His notes lay hidden beneath the mattress, ink still wet from the entries he had scratched in near darkness. Cup offered. Cup untouched. Subject, surveyor, dose likely fatal within hours. His handwriting had grown jagged. Evidence piled in ink, but the law would demand more than ink. It would demand something undeniable, something even Charleston's polite society could not explain away. A creak in the hallway froze him. Light seeped under his door, a faint glow carried by someone who moved with care. He pressed himself against the wall, breath held, as the handle turned ever so slightly. The door did not open. Instead, whispers slithered through the crack, two voices, hushed, urgent. The Richmond man. He pretends, but he sees too much. John's voice, low, almost swallowed by the storm. He will not leave, Lavinia replied, the words velvet wrapped around steel. Not without drinking. Hartwell's blood ran cold. They had marked him. His performance, the polite refusal, the feigned sip, had been convincing, but not convincing enough. She had noticed. Of course she had noticed. The footsteps retreated, fading down the stairs, but the air in the room felt thinner, as though the walls themselves had begun to close in. He pressed his palms to the sill, forcing himself to think. Escape now, in the storm, was possible, but to leave without proof would mean 17 deaths buried under the polite fiction of heart failure. His company would dismiss suspicion as paranoia, Charleston would defend one of its own, and the Wayfarer house would continue feeding the swamp. No. He had come too far. He lifted the window just enough to hear the storm more clearly. Beneath the roar of rain, another sound emerged, the scrape of wood against wood, heavy and deliberate. He peered out. Lantern light flickered near the tree line, swaying with each gust. John Fisher staggered through the mud, a canvas bundle slung across his back. The shape within sagged with unmistakable weight. With every step, the swamp swallowed him deeper, and the dark waters accepted what he carried without protest. Hartwell's stomach clenched. The boy. The young surveyor who had raised his glass hours ago. Gone now, reduced to a shape carried into black water. He turned from the window, pacing. Each beat of his heart struck like a drum of war. Stay hidden. Escape. Report. But another voice fought inside him, low, angry, insistent. You cannot let her choose the ending. Not again. He had never lost control on assignment before. Numbers were safe, patterns logical. He had trained himself to remain unshaken. But tonight, watching youth discarded like refuse, something cracked. His mask, so carefully worn, threatened to slip. A sudden knock rattled the door. Not tentative, not polite. A command. Mr. Henderson, Lavinia's voice chimed, cheerful against the storm. The night is long. May I bring you comfort? The words were practiced, but the cadence was wrong. Too insistent. Behind them, Hartwell heard the faint scrape of John's boots on the floorboards. They were both outside, waiting. He slid the chair against the door, his hands shaking despite himself. Every instinct screamed to climb out the window and flee into the rain, but he forced himself still, listening. Silence followed. Then a single, deliberate phrase, almost whispered but sharp enough to cut through the storm, no one leaves the Wayfarer thirsty. The footsteps retreated, slow, certain. Hartwell sagged against the wall, heart pounding so hard he feared they would hear it. The storm wailed louder, but it no longer drowned the truth. He was no longer the observer, the man with ledgers and notes. He was prey inside a hunter's den. For the first time, Samuel Hartwell understood, survival was not guaranteed. If he wanted the world to know what happened at the Wayfarer house, he would need more than clever ink and cautious patience. He would need to gamble his life against hers, and hope his spill of tea would not be mistaken for cowardice. The play had shifted. And now, the actors knew their audience. The storm had eased by morning, but the house was heavier than the clouds that had passed. Travelers stirred sluggishly, rubbing temples, their laughter now brittle. The young surveyor's bed lay stripped, his belongings vanished without mention. When Hartwell asked the innkeeper's boy about him, the child only shrugged and muttered, "Gone at first light." The words carried the polish of rehearsal. At the breakfast table, Lavinia presided like a queen among courtiers. Her copper hair was tied back with a ribbon of green, her dress spotless, her smile practiced to perfection. She spoke of scripture, of the weather, of the city's latest charity drive, while John moved quietly between tables, refilling cups with a grace too deliberate. Hartwell's appetite was gone. The clink of silverware sounded like nails tapping a coffin. He stirred his untouched plate, forcing the mask of Henderson, the weary cotton broker, onto his face once more. Every instinct begged him to flee, but his mission chained him to the chair. To leave now was to let 17 names sink forever beneath polite silence. "Mr. Henderson," Lavinia's voice sliced through his thoughts, soft as silk yet sharp enough to draw blood. "You are pensive this morning. Did our storm trouble your sleep?" He forced a smile. "I'm not accustomed to southern tempests." "Then perhaps my tea will soothe you." Her hand brushed his shoulder as she placed the cup before him. The almond fragrance coiled upward, faint but unmistakable, as though daring him to breathe too deeply. Hartwell met her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't bother to hide the edge beneath her charm. It was there, glittering like a blade concealed in lace. "I know what you are, and I am patient enough to wait for your mistake." He lowered his gaze, masking the chill racing through him. "You are generous, Mrs. Fisher." The title made her smile widen. "Generosity is my duty." John's music began again from the corner, slow, deliberate, each chord pressing down like a judge's gavel. The guests, lulled, returned to idle chatter, oblivious to the performance being staged before them. Hartwell's hand hovered over the cup. He did not drink. Instead, he slid it closer, feigning distraction, as though planning to enjoy it later. Lavinia's eyes flicked down, noted the move, then returned to him with a softness that was almost maternal. Almost. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Do you know, Mr. Henderson, the road breeds loneliness. Men travel far, and they crave rest. A warm room, a kind word, a gentle hand." She paused, her smile never faltering. "But sometimes men linger too long where they do not belong." The word struck like a hammer behind her velvet tone. For a moment, the room seemed to contract, the other voices fading into muffled echoes. Hartwell held her gaze, unwilling to show the fear thudding in his chest. "I imagine," he said carefully, "you would know better than anyone where men belong." Her laughter rang out, light, charming, so well performed that the others joined in without knowing why. But beneath it, Hartwell caught the flicker of something colder, a calculation, an acknowledgement that this guest would not be so easily shepherded. When breakfast ended, John collected the cups. Hartwell noticed his lingered at the top of the tray, unemptied. John's thumb brushed the rim, then he glanced at Lavinia. No words passed, but the exchange was fluent. "He resists." "Tonight, then." Hartwell excused himself, climbing the stairs 2 at a time. Inside his room, he locked the door, chest heaving. His notes felt like ashes, useless without something physical, something undeniable. He pressed his palms to his face, then to the cool glass of the window. Outside, the swamp waited, patient as death itself. The choice pressed hard: remain passive, hope to escape with only ink and suspicion, or risk everything to drag their truth into daylight. Either way, tonight would decide. Somewhere below, Lavinia's laughter floated upward, light as bells, carrying the promise of hospitality. But to Hartwell's ears, it sounded like a verdict. Night fell heavy, as if the storm had dragged the clouds down and left them draped over the earth. The swamp outside whispered with insects and unseen things shifting in the dark. Inside, the Wayfarer house glowed warm and golden, the kind of glow that promised safety to anyone naive enough to believe it. Hartwell descended to the parlor slowly, his every step echoing. He had chosen to come down, chosen to let the trap spring, because ink in his notebook was not enough. He needed more. Proof lived not on paper but in moments, moments a man could stand behind, swear to before a court. Tonight would give him that, or it would silence him forever. Lavinia was waiting. She sat near the fire, a tray before her, the porcelain cups lined like soldiers ready to march. John lingered at the piano, fingers resting on the keys but not playing, his eyes sharp and watchful. "Mr. Henderson," she said, rising smoothly. Her green dress shimmered like water in the firelight. "The road must have wearied you. Allow me." She poured with ritual precision, each motion choreographed, every angle rehearsed. Steam rose, carrying that almond note, delicate as perfume, deadly as confession. She turned, and for a heartbeat, Hartwell felt the room tilt. Her smile was not charm this time. It was triumph. He took the cup. It was warm, innocent, almost tender in his hand. He lifted it halfway, then paused. "Tell me," he said quietly, "do you ever forget their names?" The question landed like a stone in a mirror. For the first time, her composure fractured. Just for an instant, the flick of an eyelid, the twitch of a mouth. Then the mask returned. "I remember everything," she said. "It is my gift. My curse." She leaned closer, her voice a whisper sharp enough to cut, "But no one will remember you." He tilted the cup, but instead of drinking, he let the liquid spill, slow, deliberate, onto the rug at his feet. The tea darkened the fibers, the scent rising like proof written into the air. John's hand slammed the piano keys, a discordant crash that rattled the room. He rose, eyes narrowed, fists clenched. Lavinia did not flinch. Instead, she smiled wider, as if Hartwell had only confirmed what she already knew. "So," she breathed, "you are not the cotton broker after all." Hartwell's voice was steady now, stronger than he felt. 17 men. And a boy, last night. I watched your husband carry him into the swamp." The room tightened. The other guests, half drowsy from their own cups, stirred in confusion. Some blinked, trying to rise, their faces pale, their movements sluggish. The air was thick with the scent of roses and something far crueler. Lavinia turned slowly, surveying the room, then back to him. "You think anyone will believe you?" she asked. "They will say you imagined it. That I am a saint of charity, that my husband is a man of faith. Charleston loves its illusions. They will bury your words with you." Hartwell's pulse thundered, but he stood taller, louder now, pitching his voice above the crackle of the fire. "Then let them see." With one motion, he kicked the table, sending cups crashing to the floor. The liquid spread across the wood, a sharp sweetness filling the room. Gasps rose from the half-conscious travelers. Some clutched their throats. One staggered to his feet, eyes wide with dawning horror. "This is what she serves you," Hartwell shouted, his voice cutting through the haze. "This is what you drink when you trust her smile." The parlor erupted into chaos, chairs scraping, men stumbling, John lunging forward with the fury of a cornered animal. Hartwell dodged, the punch grazing his shoulder. He seized the nearest lantern and hurled it into the fireplace. Flames leapt high, light flooding the room, exposing everything, the tray, the cups, Lavinia's face frozen between fury and disbelief. Guests scrambled, shouting, some collapsing in the doorway. John swung again, but Hartwell caught his arm, twisting until bone cracked. John roared, staggering back, clutching his wrist. Lavinia did not move. She stood at the center of the chaos, her copper hair blazing in the firelight, her eyes fixed on Hartwell with a hatred that was almost holy. "You will hang with lies on your tongue," she hissed. Hartwell, breath ragged, held her gaze. "Not lies," he said. "Names. 17 of them." Outside, through the broken shouts, the pounding of hooves echoed, neighbors roused, perhaps drawn by the fire's glow or by cries carried into the swamp. For the first time, Lavinia's mask cracked not in anger, but in fear. Hartwell felt it then, the shift, the turning of the stage. The performance was over. The audience had seen too much. And as the flames roared higher, he knew the curtain had fallen not on him, but on her. The Wayfarer house did not burn to the ground that night. Charleston's fire brigades arrived too swiftly, drawn by the glow, the smoke, the clamor of half-conscious men staggering into the road. But the blaze left its scar, scorched beams, blackened rugs, shattered porcelain that still smelled faintly of almonds. By dawn, the house no longer seemed hospitable. Its white columns were streaked with soot, its windows broken, its doors gaping like wounds. Neighbors whispered of cries that had carried into the swamp, of lanterns flashing in the dark, of men who stumbled into the street gasping that they had been poisoned. Lavinia and John were taken in irons. John's wrist hung crooked where it had broken, his silence was his only resistance. Lavinia, by contrast, walked as though entering a ballroom, chin lifted, copper hair catching the sun, her smile radiant as ever. She offered thanks to the officers who escorted her, as if they were guests she had been honored to host. Hartwell watched it all with an exhaustion that cut deeper than any wound. His notes were no longer merely notes. They were testimony, soon to be joined by witnesses who had lived to feel the burn of her tea in their veins. Proof enough, finally, to break through Charleston's veil of courtesy. The trial that followed was less about evidence than about spectacle. Crowds pressed into the courthouse, eager to glimpse the infamous hostess who had turned Southern hospitality into a weapon. Lavinia performed for them, smiling, laughing, even quoting scripture with a voice so melodic that some wavered in their certainty. But when the ledgers were read aloud, when fragments of jewelry were laid on the table, when men swore under oath that they had felt death creeping through their bodies after drinking from her hand, the mask began to falter. John was sentenced first, and accepted his fate with silence. Lavinia, when given her turn, leaned into the rail and declared that she regretted nothing. "Men trusted beauty more than wisdom," she said, her voice rising above the murmurs. "And beauty is a sharper blade." Her words lingered long after she was led away. On the morning of her execution, Hartwell stood at a distance. He did not need to see the rope to know its work. He watched instead the crowd, their morbid fascination, their whispered prayers, their insistence on turning horror into legend. He knew that in time, the truth would warp. She would be remembered as a monster by some, a martyr by others, her name woven into ghost stories told to thrill children. But he remembered the surveyor's bright eyes, the way they had dulled so quickly. He remembered the petals on the floorboards, the taste of poison on the air, the sound of Lavinia's whisper at his door, "No one leaves the Wayfarer thirsty." When it was over, he turned away, notebook pressed to his chest. Justice had been done, but not cleanly. Justice never was. Years later, when he passed that stretch of road, the Wayfarer was gone, collapsed, reclaimed by ivy and silence. Yet the air still smelled faintly of roses, and sometimes, when the wind shifted, he swore he caught a trace of almonds. He would tighten his grip on the reins, urge his horse forward, and remind himself that some performances never end. E1